Today I'm doing a really cool video about a company who's making coffee and chocolate using cellular agriculture. And why am I at a Target? Well, I wanted to see where coffee comes from. So we have Brazil, interesting, it doesn't actually say. This one just talks about their roastery. It doesn't actually tell you where it was grown. Oh, Ethiopia. Ethiopia and Honduras, and you can only see that by looking at the barcode. Okay, here we have Peru, Ethiopia. Coffee, you get some brands that will tell you where it's from. Some of them don't. But with chocolate, it's a very different story. Alright, so we'll get some brands, like there's German chocolate here. We have the classic Swiss chocolate. But the cocoa isn't actually grown in those places. That's just where it's made. Here we have a brand that talks about being fair trade. Right, so that's all about where is the cocoa to make this chocolate actually sourced. Right, so for our Lindt bar chocolate, as much as they're gonna tell you that it's Swiss, the cocoa isn't actually grown in Switzerland. Right, and this same thing with peanut butter cups, like with Hershey's. Where does their chocolate come from? It just tells you that it's made in Pennsylvania, but that does not tell you where the cocoa actually comes from. And you have companies like that are more premium, like Lily's, and so again, they make chocolate peanut butter cups. They'll tell you their chocolate or cocoa is fair trade. And so if you want to find out more information, you can go to the fair trade website for sourcing. So a company that puts fair trade on their label probably does a better job at sourcing their chocolate than someone like Hershey's, who, honestly, who knows where it comes from. You're going to have to do a lot of digging to find out. The supply chains are pretty opaque, less so for coffee, more so for cocoa that's in your chocolate. Like, it's hard to know where most of this chocolate comes from. I think that's important to think about as we think about where does our food come from. When you're buying candy from the candy aisle, some of it we can have a little bit of an idea, but a lot of it we can't. I want to find out where chocolate comes from, right? So cocoa is one of the main ingredients in chocolate. And if I go to the Hershey website, we can see here that during 2020, I don't think there's an updated one, but they sourced products directly from the following suppliers. So there's a bunch of trading companies. There's big conglomerates like Cargill, a bunch of processing companies, and different suppliers. So the cocoa used by our suppliers comes from a number of countries, including Brazil, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Ghana, Indonesia, Nigeria, Papua New Guinea, and Peru. And so we have a map here of all their suppliers. If I want to know where it comes from, I really have to go into the website. I have to dig to see. Here are their supplying countries. And of course, this is a big industry in these countries supporting these economies. But then there's news around, that Hershey is accused of not upholding sustainability efforts in West Africa. So this is the end of 2020. This is a couple years ago. Dispute began when the industry traders noticed that an unnamed source had purchased a lot of beans in the futures market, that prices rose by more than 30%. Of course, it's a very small industry, and they quickly suspected that the buyer was Hershey. If you're a large company, you want to try and get the cheapest price. All of this is really driven by a bid to have the lowest possible price for your product. If you're a large supplier like Hershey, you're going to put a lot of pressure on these local communities. Then we have Fair Trade, which is a body that tries to provide decent working conditions and a fair deal for farmers and workers in a lot of these countries. Right? And so they do a lot of traceability on the supply chain, and you'll probably see this on a lot of products, but most commonly it's with coffee, beans, and cocoa, because the supply chain is just so complicated. With between, you have the farmers and you have the producers, and then you have the traders. So a bunch of people just make money on trading the product and trying to be the middleman. So there's a lot of buyers and sellers, and it's really all very complicated. You end up paying a little bit more money for those products, but it's an extra sum of money paid on top of the selling price that farmers or workers invest in projects of their choice. They decide together and democratically how to spend the fair trade premium to reach their goals, such as improving their farming, their business, health, education, and their community. Really, this organization tries to give the people who are actually growing the product a bit of a fairer chance in this market, because so much of it is controlled by these large companies who, maybe on their website they claim that they're following good practices, but ultimately they're trying to get the cheapest price that they can for their product. So this, I'm singling out Hershey, but the same would go for Starbucks, the same would go for name Mars Company, the same would go for, name your large chocolate or coffee conglomerate. Okay, so if I'm on the Fairtrade website, I can see that we have the dark blue countries, which produce products. We have, and the lighter blue countries, who both produce and help organize. And we have the organization countries. These countries don't produce any of these products. We don't grow coffee or cocoa in these countries. I'm sure I could do lots of videos where all this all comes from, but my point really is just to show that these supply chains are incredibly complex. This is a number of years ago. I will link to it in the bottom, but it's from the exact organization that we were just looking at, is trying to make both the conditions of trade more equitable for the farmers who are actually growing the coffee. And what does this say? Well, we're not paying the true cost of our coffee or our chocolate. All signs point to major disruptions in the flow of coffee over the next few decades. The accelerating effects of climate change, decreased soil fertility, coupled with the rising costs of fertilizer and other imports, competition for natural resources, and an aging farming population, all seems like complex problems that the average shopper can't fix. However, a key factor that is harming the future of coffee is well within the reach of every coffee drinker: price. Coffee is booming, but farmers are earning less than $1 a pound for their beans. What if we had a better way?
Humankind's relationship with chocolate has been thousands of years in the making. We've always found chocolate decadent. It has over 300 compounds, so it's healing, soothing, intoxicating. Over 70% of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, the rest from Latin America and Asia. But our love of chocolate has incentivized deforestation. And when I talk to the largest chocolate companies in the world, many express a fear they won't be able to meet rising global demand. At California Culture, we make chocolate from cocoa cells grown in bioreactors. We'll have one cell line high in rich cocoa flavanols and the second line high in cocoa butter. My co-founder has scaled plant cells in bioreactors to 20,000 liters previously in multiple plant species. For California cultured chocolate, it'll take us approximately 2 to 3 years to get there. The magic, just like everything else cell-based, is in the media. Because we're making food, we can't use synthetic chemical growth stimulants like 2,4-D or IAA. We discovered a combination of natural plant hormones, and not only do they work 2 times better than synthetic stimulants. So our go-to market, our early revenue, will be in rare, intense flavonoids, which the cells naturally make, which will purify into an extract for $200 a gram. We have corporate partner on this from Japan, which has a refined passion for the exotic and rare compounds in cocoa varieties. In chocolate, the premium and super premium categories have exploded. Chocolate reflects its terroir, absorbing compounds from its soil. We're engineering this terroir right here in our lab in Davis, California. And we're going to take chocolate to a new level of sustainability, a new level of ethics, and a new level of flavor. This right here is our very first bar.
We're creating our first cell-cultured chocolate confection bars. This is the first iteration proof of concept to kind of show that we're eliciting some of the 1,500 flavor molecules that are found in chocolate.
Invitopia provided a great launch pad to build up our technology, which we're doing right now at California Cultured. Allows us collaboration with other up-and-coming entrepreneurs to sort of solve the big problem of how could you have things that taste sweet but are actually good for you.
Alan, welcome. Here we are.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for inviting me.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and California Cultured.
Sure. I'm Alan Perlstein. I am a scientist entrepreneur. I've been working in the food tech and biopharma industry for the last 20 years. I started off my career working in a tiny little lab in Bayshore, Long Island, working to create cell-cultured fish in Morris Benjaminson's lab quite a while ago.
Awesome. And tell us about what you're doing now, and really what California Cultured is. A little bit separate from the Benjaminson work, but tell us a little bit about the startup.
Sure. So at California Cultured, we are growing cell-cultured chocolate using plant cell suspension culture technology.
Awesome. And I was able to try a sample, and it really blew me out of the water. But oftentimes we might say, like, okay, we understand why we're going after cell-cultured meat, but what are the benefits and what are the main reasons to go after cell-cultured chocolate?
It has some similar issues with sustainability, ethics, as well as human and animal rights. Right now, what's happening in Africa, where roughly 70 to 75% of all the world's chocolate is mass produced. It's currently grown in many tropical areas where the forest used to be, and many really bad incentives have basically forced the industry to be really destructive, clear-cutting many hundreds of thousands of acres of forest to grow chocolate. And because chocolate is such a low value commodity crop in many areas of Africa, they use really inexpensive labor. And that also incentivizes forced child labor as well, with sort of the worst environmental and labor practices. It was seen as almost purely science fiction and purely like truly embryonic attempt to take a swing at cell culture meat. They were thinking about starting a company and starting to talk with some investors, and like no one wanted to ever touch this. The only people that ever wanted to talk to us at all were like maybe some groups in the UN, and that's it, or some specialists. People didn't really know the direction or what was going to happen, but there were some studies and papers showing that it's going to take between 30 to 50 years for anything to really happen. I think there were three specific things: media development for these hormones and other really growth factors. It was cell line, and it was bioreactor design and environmental chamber growth. And all of these things were only used for pharma and barely even any food applications at the time. So it was still interesting to explore and see what types of advancements that we can make in truly a shoestring budget, where maybe $50 a week to maybe buy some goldfish, buy some inexpensive reagents off eBay and some tools, trying to refurb everything. And that was sort of our experience, trying to grow these cells. It was quite difficult. It was, I think, from every 10 experiments, like 8 failed just because of contamination alone. So very difficult to do. I remember the famous scientist from Amsterdam that came up with the first patents, and there was a little bit of interest, and mostly, from what I remember, it was starting to actually TV shows and science shows started adding cell culture meat into the plots of their shows. And to me, that was really cool because I never really saw that until some of these studies coming out. And I think all these little things might have all contributed to like sparking some imagination. So it's that thing where someone in science fiction wrote something, then someone actually did an experiment to see if it's real, then more people talk about it in media and TV shows, and inspires the next generation to talk about it and do even bigger experiments. And seeing all these developments over the last 20 years were very interesting. So just to call out, I know Colbert was one of the first talk show hosts to talk about it on a segment called Schmeat, which was very interesting. And there was also a really cool comedy show called Better Off Ted that had a very interesting snippet of cell cultured meat as well. So it was really interesting seeing it put into different cultural references.
Wow. And do you think if that team that was trying to get funding was able to either get funding or maybe even get investor funding to start a company, do you think that the world of cultured meat would be different today?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would have at least de-risked some of the early technologies. It's just a truly brute force types of technologies that have to be developed. So it's just tens of thousands of experiments with maybe a little bit of success, and then another 10,000 experiments to make sure what you're seeing is real and not like an artifact or something else. So it's just a very long and tedious process to figure out what cells could be used for meat or what types of foods and environments they like. And it just takes an obscene amount of man hours and technology to figure out. But if it would have had a decade more of work gone into it, we probably would have already had some advancement of meat in some restaurants in the United States already. So we We think from maybe talking with some others in the field, it's probably going to be about 2025 to 2026 before we see some consistent restaurants offering some cell culture meat for sale.
Okay, I know that interview deviated a little bit from coffee and chocolate, but I just think it's so important to highlight Alan because he is creating this cool company that makes coffee and chocolate, but he's been working in the industry for so many years. He's been working in meat before, 20 years ago, before a lot of these companies that we see today are established. And so I'm putting the whole interview again from CMS Astro. They actually focus on space food. He has a number of points as well on growing chocolate in space. And really great interview. Alex is a great host, and Alan just knows so much. And so I highly recommend you watch the full thing. I'm just putting that in the description. Again, I think this company is super exciting, and I'm definitely wanting to invest in a founder who has so much experience and who's really creating chocolate and coffee, which are products that other startups are not focusing on. Everyone's kind of focusing on how can we get the steak? How can we get the meat? And there's really so many other opportunities that are beyond meat that we can actually focus on. So I think it's a cool company. Again, I could do so many videos on this, but I really just wanted to do this one to highlight one of the opportunities, and that this is, again, a company that you can invest in by both looking into cult food science or agronomics. Those two platforms both own part of this company. Thanks for watching. Oh, I tried it and it's amazing.